The library was quiet on that cold November afternoon, and Una Park sat alone in the far corner where the shadows fell heavy across the old wooden tables. She wore an oversized gray hoodie that seemed to swallow her small body, and her dark hair hung loose around her face like a curtain hiding her from the world. Around her, other students laughed and whispered and lived their loud lives, but nobody looked at Una. Nobody ever did. She was 22 years old and a junior at Westbrook University, studying astrophysics. Her grades were perfect, but she never raised her hand in class. She never spoke unless a professor called on her directly, and even then her voice came out soft and flat, like she was reading from a script. She ate lunch alone every single day, sitting on the same bench near the science building with her headphones in and her eyes on nothing. Her roommate Hannah Lee had lived with her for almost 2 years now, and she still knew almost nothing about the girl. Hannah was the opposite of Una. She was loud and bright and always surrounded by friends. She threw parties and stayed out late and filled their small dorm room with noise and life. But Una was like a ghost. She came and went without sound. She smiled politely, but never warmly. She answered questions, but never asked any of her own. Sometimes Hannah would wake up in the middle of the night and find Una gone. Her bed would be empty and cold, like she had never been there at all. When Hannah asked where she went, Una would just smile that small empty smile and say she had trouble sleeping and went for walks. But nobody takes walks at 3 in the morning in the freezing cold. Nobody normal anyway. Professor David Mitchell taught advanced astrophysics, and he had noticed something strange about Una Park from the very first day of class. She sat in the back row and never spoke, but her written work was extraordinary. Her papers referenced theories that hadn't been published yet. She wrote about concepts that even he barely understood. When he asked her where she learned these things, she just shrugged and said she read a loathe. He didn't believe her, not even a little bit. One night in late November, Hannah woke to a sound she couldn't identify. It was a low hum like electricity buzzing through the walls. She looked over at Una's bed and found it empty again. But this time, something made her get up. Something made her walk to the window and look outside. Behind the science building, there was a light. Strange shimmering glow that pulsed and flickered like nothing Hannah had ever seen. It lasted only a few seconds, and then it was gone. The darkness returned, and the campus was quiet again. Hannah stood at the window for a long time, her heart beating fast in her chest. When Una returned at dawn, she looked exhausted. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She moved slowly, like every step cost her something. Hannah pretended to be asleep, but she watched through half-closed eyes as Una changed out of her clothes. There were bruises on her arms, dark purple marks that looked fresh and painful. But by the time Hannah woke up for real, just 2 hours later, those bruises were gone. Una's skin was smooth and unmarked, like the injuries had never existed at all. Hannah told herself she was imagining things. She told herself there had to be a normal explanation. But deep down, she knew something was very wrong with her roommate. Something that went beyond strange sleeping habits and mysterious disappearances. The truth was something Hannah could never have imagined. Not in her wildest dreams. Una Park was not just a quiet college student. She was not just a shy girl who liked to keep to herself in the vast darkness between the stars where humanity had not yet learned to look. There existed a network of civilizations older than Earth as a mountains. They called themselves the Galactic Coalition, and they had been watching humanity for centuries. First contact had happened decades ago, but it was kept secret from the general population. Only a handful of humans knew the truth. Only a few had been allowed to step beyond Earth and see what waited in the void. Una's parents had been 2 of those people. They were diplomats working in the shadows, building bridges between Earth and the stars. They were killed when Una was 16 years old. A crime lord named Vex Morrow had ordered their deaths. Vex was a monster in every sense of the word. A 7-foot reptilian warlord who built his empire on the suffering of others. He trafficked sentient beings across 12 star systems. He bought and sold lives like they were nothing. And he had killed Yuna's parents because they got too close to exposing his Operation Sina. Had been just a teenager lost and broken and burning with a rage that threatened to consume her completely. But instead of letting that rage destroy her, she had shaped it into something else. Something dangerous. She found a bounty hunter named Old Gray, a grizzled alien veteran who had been hunting criminals across the galaxy for longer than most species had existed. He saw something in Yuna, something fierce and unbreakable. He agreed to train her. For 2 years Yuna learned. She learned how to fight with her fists and with weapons that humans had never seen. She learned how to track targets across planets and space stations and asteroid fields. She learned how to move without being seen and how to strike without warning. She learned how to kill. At 18 years old, she collected her first bounty, a smuggler who had murdered a family of refugees for the cargo in their ship. Yuna found him hiding on a frozen moon at the edge of Coalition space. She dragged him back alive because the bounty was higher that way, but she made sure he suffered for every life he had taken by. The time she was 20, her reputation had spread across 3 quadrants of the galaxy. They called her the Silent Reaper because she never spoke during a hunt. She simply appeared, and then her targets disappeared. She never failed. She never showed mercy. She became the thing that monsters feared. But Yuna was tired. She had been hunting for years, and the killing had started to weigh on her soul. She wanted something else, something normal. She wanted to remember what it felt like to be humans. She came back to Earth. She enrolled in college. She became the quiet girl in the back of the classroom who nobody noticed. She tried to live a simple life and pretend that the galaxy and all its horrors didn't exist. But the galaxy had not forgotten her. Never would Professor Mitchell continue to watch her. He had resources that a normal professor shouldn't have, connections to organizations that operated in the shadows just like Yuna did. He knew there was something special about her, something dangerous. And he was determined to find out what. Hannah continued to notice the strange things. The midnight disappearances. The impossible healing. The way Yuna sometimes looked at the sky like she was expecting something to come down from it. The way she moved through crowds like water flowing around stones, never touching anyone, never being touched. And somewhere far away on a space station called the Drift, a man named Marcus Cole was planning his revenge. He had served under Vex Morrow for 15 years. He had watched the Silent Reaper tear apart everything they had built, and he had spent every moment since then preparing for the day when he would make her pay. The quiet girl on campus had no idea that her 2 worlds were about to collide. She had no idea that the piece she had fought so hard to find was about to shatter into a million pieces. She sat in the library alone, in the shadows, reading about stars that she had actually visited, and she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be normal. She was wrong. The hunt was coming to her whether she wanted it or not, and when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. A cold gray Tuesday in early December when the sky hung low and heavy with clouds that promised snow. Yuna was walking back to her dorm after her last class of the day, thinking about nothing in particular, when something crashed into her from behind. She spun around instantly, her body moving into a fighting stance before her mind even caught up. But what she saw made her freeze. It was a boy, maybe 15 or 16 years old, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that were filled with absolute terror. He was dressed in human clothes that didn't quite fit right, and he was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. But it wasn't from the cold. Yuna knew that immediately. He was Villani, a species from a small world on the outer edges of Coalition space. They were known for being gentle and peaceful, and they were also known for being frequent targets of slavers. Their kind fetched high prices on the black market. The boy grabbed her arm and His grip was surprisingly strong for someone so small and scared. His words came out in a rush, mixing Galactic common with broken English. "Please," he gasped. "You are the one. They told me to find you, the Silent Reaper. You have to help me. They are coming. They are here." Yuna felt her blood turn to ice. She looked around, quickly scanning the campus for threats. She saw nothing out of place, but that meant nothing. The best hunters knew how to blend in. "Who is coming?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "Slavers," the boy said. His name came out as a jumble of sounds that humans couldn't properly pronounce, but he said he went by. "Tommy here." Tommy had been living in hiding with a small community of alien refugees that existed in secret on Earth. But 3 days ago, men had come asking questions. Men who weren't human, no matter how well they disguised themselves. Refugees had scattered. Tommy had run. He had heard stories about a human hunter who protected the innocent. A woman who even the worst criminals feared. He had used every resource. He had to track her here to this college campus in the middle of nowhere. Yuna closed her eyes for just a moment. She had tried so hard to leave this life behind. She had tried so hard to be normal, but the galaxy kept finding her. The darkness kept reaching out. "Come with me," she said, and her voice had changed. It was harder now, colder. This was not Yuna, the quiet college student. This was the Silent Reaper waking up. She took Tommy back to her dorm room. Hannah wasn't there, which was good, because Yuna needed time to think. She gave Tommy food and water and watched him eat like he hadn't had a proper meal in days. While he ate, she asked questions. The slavers were connected to a syndicate she recognized, one that had grown powerful in the years since Vex Morrow's death. Someone new was running things now. Someone smart and ruthless and very, very patient. Tommy didn't know who. He just knew they wanted him because the Lani were valuable and because he had seen things he shouldn't have seen. Yuna was about to ask more when she felt it, a prickling at the back of her neck. The instinct that had kept her alive through 100 hunts was screaming at her. Now they were here. She moved to the window and looked out at the campus below. 3 figures were walking across the quad. They looked like students, maybe a little older, maybe a little too well-dressed, but nothing that would draw attention from anyone who wasn't looking. But Yuna was looking, and she saw the truth in the way they moved. Their steps were too precise. Their eyes were scanning every face, every shadow, every possible threat. Hunters. She recognized the type immediately. "Stay here," she told Tommy. "Do not open this door for anyone except me. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, there is a phone on my desk. Call the number saved under gray. He will come for you." Tommy nodded, his blue face pale with fear. Yuna grabbed a jacket from her closet. It looked ordinary, but the lining was reinforced with materials that could stop a blade or absorb the impact of a fall. She slipped 2 small knives into hidden sheaths at her wrists. They were not from Earth. These blades could cut through almost anything. She left the room and walked calmly toward the gymnasium where she had seen the 3 figures heading. She moved like she always did on campus, quiet and unremarkable. Just another student going about her day. But inside she was preparing. She was remembering. She was becoming the thing she had tried so hard to forget. The gymnasium was empty at this hour. The lights were dim, and the air smelled like old sweat and rubber. Yuna slipped inside through a side door and climbed up to the 2nd level, where she could watch without being seen below. The 3 hunters had cornered someone, a janitor by the look of him, an older man with gray hair who was backing away with his hands raised. They were asking him questions, demanding to know if he had seen a blue-skinned boy. The janitor was shaking his head, saying he didn't understand, saying he didn't know anything. One of the hunters pulled out a weapon. It looked like a simple black rod, but Yuna knew what it was, a neural disruptor. One touch, and it would send waves of agony through the nervous system. It could make anyone talk. Eventually, she dropped from the upper level. The first hunter never saw her coming. She struck him in the throat with the edge of her hand, crushing his windpipe before he could make a sound. He collapsed and she was already moving. The second hunter spun around pulling his own weapon, but Yuna was faster. She grabbed his arm and twisted, and the sound of bone breaking echoed through the empty gymnasium. The third hunter was smarter. He had already backed away, putting distance between them. He had his weapon aimed at the terrified janitor, using him as a shield. "Let me go," he said, and his voice was calm, almost bored. "Or the human dies." Yuna stopped. She stood perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the hunter's face. She could see the arrogance there, the certainty that he was in control. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "You at 3 seconds," she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "Leave this planet and never return, or die here." The hunter laughed. He actually laughed. "That is very funny," he said. "Little human girl thinks she can threaten me. Do you know who I work for? Do you know what we will do to this world when he—" Never finished the sentence. Yuna moved so fast that the janitor later swore she had teleported. One moment she was 10 feet away, and the next she was behind the hunter. Her knife was at his throat, and her other hand had already disabled his weapon. He hadn't even seen her cross the distance. "I know exactly who you work for," Yuna whispered in his ear, "and you are going to deliver a message. Tell your employer that Earth is under my protection. Tell them that the Silent Reaper is watching, and tell them that if they send anyone else, I will not be so merciful." She released him with a shove that sent him stumbling forward. He turned to look at her, and for the first time there was fear in his eyes, real fear. The kind that came from suddenly realizing you were not the predator, you were the prey. The hunter ran. He grabbed his injured companion and dragged him toward the door, leaving the third one unconscious on the floor. They would be off the planet within hours. Yuna was certain of that. She turned to the janitor, who was staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. "You saw nothing," she said. "It was not a request." The old man nodded frantically, and then fled. Yuna stood alone in the empty gymnasium, surrounded by the evidence of violence. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. But inside something had shifted. Something she had tried to bury for years was clawing its way back to the surface. She was not normal. She never had been. She was the Silent Reaper. And no matter how far she ran, that would never change. When she returned to her dorm room, she found Tommy safe and Hana standing in the middle of the room. Her roommate was staring at her with an expression Yuna had never seen before. It was fear and confusion and something else. Something that might have been wonder. Hana said one word. "What are you?" And Yuna knew that her secret life was secret no more. The room was silent for a long moment. Hana stood near the door, her bag still hanging from her shoulder, her keys still clutched in her hand. She had come back early from a study group, expecting to find her quiet roommate reading or sleeping. Instead, she had found a terrified, blue-skinned alien boy hiding under Yuna's bed, and Yuna herself was nowhere to be. Seeing Tommy had panicked when the door opened. He had tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Hana had screamed, and then stopped screaming, because the boy looked more scared than she was. They had stared at each other for what felt like forever, until Yuna returned now. Hana was looking at her roommate like she had never seen her before, and in a way she hadn't. The girl standing in front of her was not the quiet, invisible Yuna she had lived with for 2 years. This Yuna stood differently. Her shoulders were back and her spine was straight, and there was something cold and ancient in her eyes. Something dangerous. "What are you?" Hana asked again. Yuna took a slow breath. She had always known this moment might come. She had hoped it wouldn't, but she had prepared for it anyway. She had a dozen different lies ready, a dozen ways to explain away what Hana had seen. But looking at her roommate's face, looking at the fear and the confusion, and yes, even the hurt she found, she couldn't use any of them. "I am going to tell you the truth," Yuna said. "And when I am done, you can decide if you want to stay or go. I will not stop you either." She sat down on her bed and began to talk. She told Hana everything. The Galactic Coalition and their secret presence on Earth. Her parents and their work as diplomats. Their murder at the hands of Vex Morrow. her training with Old Gray, her years as a bounty hunter, her reputation as the Silent Reaper. She told her about the darkness between the stars and the monsters that lived there. She told her about the hunts and the kills and the endless weight of blood on her hands. Tommy sat quietly in the corner listening. He had heard stories about the Silent Reaper legends, really. Tales told in whispers by refugees who had been saved and criminals who had been caught. Hearing the truth from her own lips was something else entirely. When Yuna finished talking, the room was silent again. Hana had sat down at some point. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. But she hadn't run. She hadn't screamed. She was still there. So, Hana said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "You are like a space assassin bounty hunter," Yuna corrected. "There is a difference." Hana let out a laugh. It was short and sharp and slightly hysterical, but it was a laugh. And then she asked a question that Yuna had not expected. "Can you teach me to fight?" Like that, Yuna blinked. For just a moment, her cold mask slipped, and she looked genuinely surprised. "Why would you want that?" Hana shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe because I just found out aliens are real, and some of them are apparently slavers who hunt children. Maybe because my roommate is apparently the most dangerous person on the planet, and I feel like I should be able to at least throw a punch. Maybe because," her voice broke slightly, "because I am scared, and I don't want to feel helpless." Yuna studied her roommate for a long moment. She had expected fear. She had expected rejection. She had not expected this. She had not expected Hana to look at the truth of what she was and decide to step closer instead of running away. "Okay," Yuna said finally. "I will teach you what I can. But first, we have bigger problems. The hunters I dealt with tonight were just scouts. There will be more coming, and I need to find out who sent them." The investigation took 3 days. 3 days of Yuna using contacts she had not spoken to in years, reaching out through encrypted channels that bounced signals across the galaxy. 3 days of Tommy hiding in their dorm room, too afraid to go outside. 3 days of Hana learning basic combat moves in the empty gymnasium. Late at night, when no one else was around, what Yuna discovered made her blood run cold. The slavers were connected to a syndicate run by a man named Marcus Cole. He was human, one of the few who had risen to power in the galactic underworld. He had been Vex Morrow's second in command, his most trusted lieutenant, and he had escaped when Yuna killed his master 3 years ago. Marcus had spent every moment since then rebuilding. He had taken the scattered pieces of Vex Morrow's empire and forged them into something new, something bigger. He had expanded into new territories, made alliances with other criminal organizations, recruited an army of mercenaries and killers. And through it all, he had been planning one thing. Revenge. Tommy was not just a random target. He had stumbled onto information about Marcus' operations while hiding with the refugee community. He had seen things he shouldn't have seen, heard conversations he shouldn't have heard. Marcus wanted him silenced, but more than that, Marcus wanted to use him as bait, to draw out the Silent Reaper, to finally face the woman who had destroyed everything he had built. There was another problem. Professor Mitchell called Yuna into his office on the 4th day. He closed the door behind her and activated a device that made the air hum with strange energy. A privacy field, Yuna realized. Technology that should not exist on Earth. "I know what you are," he said. Yuna tensed, ready to fight or run. But Mitchell raised his hands, showing they were empty. "I am not your enemy," he continued. "I am part of an organization that monitors alien activity on Earth. We have known about the coalition for decades. We have been watching you since you enrolled here." Yuna forced herself to relax slightly. "Who else knows?" "Just me for now," Mitchell said. "But my superiors are asking questions. Your little fight at the gymnasium did not go unnoticed. We have cameras everywhere, Miss Park, hidden ones. And while your speed made it difficult to see exactly what happened, it was clear that something unusual took place." "So what do you want?" Yuna asked. Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "I want to understand. Are you a threat to this planet? Or are you something else?" Una met his eyes without flinching. I am whatever Earth needs me to be. There was a long pause. Then Mitchell nodded slowly. I believe you. But we need to work together. There are things happening that are bigger than one bounty hunter, bigger than one refugee boy. There is a storm coming, Miss Park. And if we don't prepare for it, Earth could be caught in the middle. Una did not trust him. Not completely. But she recognized the truth in his words, and she needed allies if she was going to face Marcus Cole. She told Mitchell about Marcus, about his vendetta, about his plans, about the threat he posed not just to her, but to every refugee community on Earth. Marcus wasn't just seeking revenge. He was planning something bigger. A coordinated attack designed to expose Earth's alien population, to destabilize the planet's relationship with the Coalition, to burn everything down just to hurt the woman who had taken his master from him. If he succeeds, Una said, Earth could be classified as hostile. We would be cut off from the Coalition forever. No more protection. No more trade. No more contact. We would be alone. Mitchell was silent for a long moment. Then he said, What do you need? Una thought about it. She thought about the girl she had been trying to be, the quiet student who wanted nothing more than a normal life. That girl was gone now. Maybe she had never really existed. And Allie need to go to him. Una said, I need to end this before it begins. And where is he? Mitchell asked. Una smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only cold determination. He's on a space station called the Drift. She said, It is a lawless place where criminals and killers go to hide. It is where Marcus has built his new empire, and it is where I am going to tear it all down. Hunt was beginning again, and this time it would not end until one of them was dead. The next 2 weeks were the busiest of Una's life. She had spent years trying to disappear, trying to become invisible, trying to forget the woman she had been. But now she was waking that woman up piece by piece, and she was remembering why the galaxy had learned to fear her. The first step was gathering her team. She could not assault the Drift alone. It was a fortress built into a hollowed asteroid, protected by automated defenses and thousands of armed criminals. She needed people she could trust. People who owed her or believed in her, or simply wanted to see Marcus Cole dead as much as she did. Her first call went to Ricky. He was a weapons dealer who operated out of a hidden base on Earth's moon. He was human, but he had lived off-world for so long that he barely remembered what grass felt like. Una had saved his life 6 years ago, when a deal went bad, and he had been repaying that debt ever since. What do you need? He asked. When she explained the situation, everything. Una said, weapons that can punch through starship hulls, armor that can stop plasma rounds, explosives for when things get loud, and something special for Marcus himself. Ricky laughed. It will cost you. Put it on my tab. Una replied. Her second call went to Grace. She was a pilot, the best Una had ever known. Human like Ricky, but raised on a colony ship that traveled between star systems. Grace could fly anything from a cargo shuttle to a warship, and she had once navigated an asteroid field while bleeding from 3 gunshot wounds just to get Una to safety going after Marcus. Grace said when she heard the plan about time. Someone should have killed that snake years ago. I need a ride to the Drift, Una said, and I need you to get us out again when things go wrong. Grace snorted. When not I. Una smiled slightly. You know me too well. Her third call was the hardest. Old Gray did not answer at first. He had retired 2 years ago after a hunt that nearly killed him. He had told Una he was done with the life, done with the killing, done with the endless parade of monsters and victims and blood. But Una called again and again, and finally he answered. His face appeared on the screen, weathered and scarred, his gray skin marked with the white lines of old wounds. His species lived for centuries, and Old Gray was older than most. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched civilizations burn. He had trained more hunters than he could remember, and most of them were dead now. Little Reaper, he said, using the name he had called her since she was 16. What trouble have you found now? Una told him about Marcus, about his plans, about the threat to Earth, about the hunt she was planning. Old Gray listened in silence, his ancient eyes giving nothing away. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I am retired," he said. "Finally, I know," Una replied. "This is a young person's fight, I know then. Why are you calling me?" "Because," Una said, and her voice cracked just slightly, "you are the only family I have left, and I cannot do this alone." Another long silence. Then Old Gray sighed, and something like a smile crossed his scarred face. "I will meet you at the rendezvous point," he said. "One last hunt for you, little one." While Una gathered her team, Marcus was making his move. Reports started coming in from refugee communities across the globe. Safe houses were being attacked. Communications were being disrupted. Families who had been hiding in peace for years were suddenly running for their lives. Mitchell's organizations scrambled to respond, but they were overwhelmed. They had never faced a coordinated off-world threat before. They had spent decades monitoring and studying and preparing, but they had never actually fought a war. And that was exactly what this was becoming. Hannah watched all of this with growing horror. She had been training with Una every night, learning to fight, learning to move, learning to survive. But she was still just a college student. She was still just a normal girl who had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. "Let me come with you," she said one night after a particularly brutal training session. "I can help." Una shook her head. "No, but I could." "You would die," Una said flatly. "The drift is not a place for beginners. It is not a place for heroes looking to prove themselves. It is a slaughterhouse, and everyone there is either a killer or a victim. I will not add you to the body count." Hannah wanted to argue, but she saw the look in Una's eyes. She saw the weight of all the death she had witnessed, all the death she had caused, and she understood that Una was not trying to be cruel. She was trying to protect her. "Then, what can I do?" Hannah asked. "Here," Una said. "Watch over Tommy, keep him safe, until I return. If something happens to me, Mitchell will help you disappear. He will make sure you are protected." Hannah felt tears burning in her eyes. "And if you don't come back," Una paused. She looked at her roommate, this loud, bright girl who had somehow become her friend. The only real friend she had made in years. "If I don't come back," Una said, "tell everyone I was just a quiet girl who liked astrophysics. Let that be my legacy." Hannah shook her head. "Come back and tell them yourself." The night before she left, Una stood on the roof of the dormitory, looking up at the stars. She could name 100 of them. She had visited dozens. She had fought and bled and killed under skies that humans had never seen. But this sky, this was the sky of her home. This was the sky her parents had loved. Tommy joined her after a while. The blue-skinned boy moved quietly. Now he had learned to be invisible in a world that wanted to capture him. He stood beside Una and looked up at the same stars. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "Not yet," Una replied. "This is not over." Tommy nodded. "I know, but still, thank you for not turning me away, for believing my." Una looked at him, and for just a moment, her cold mask softened. "When this is finished," she said, "you will never have to run again. I promise you that." The next morning, Una left campus for the last time. She met Grace at a hidden landing site 3 miles outside of town. The ship was small and fast, designed for speed rather than comfort. Ricky was already aboard, surrounded by enough weapons to start a small war. Old Gray arrived an hour later, his own ship, cloaked and hidden nearby. Grace plotted a course that would take them through 3 wormhole gates and past a dozen patrol stations. The drift was on the edge of coalition space, in a region where laws meant nothing and power was the only currency. They would arrive in 18 hours. During the journey, Una reviewed everything Tommy had told her about Marcus operations. She memorized patrol routes and security codes and the layout of the station. She planned for every contingency, every possible failure, every way the mission could go wrong. Old Gray watched her work and said nothing. But there was pride in his ancient eyes, pride in what his student had become. When they dropped out of the final wormhole gate, the drift hung before them. It was massive, larger than any structure Una had seen before. A hollowed asteroid transformed into a city of sin and violence, home to 50,000 criminals and refugees and survivors. Somewhere inside, Marcus Cole was waiting. He knew she was coming. She was certain of that. He had been preparing for this moment for years, but so is you going quiet, Una said as the team gathered in the cargo. Old Ricky's distraction should buy us 30 minutes to reach the command center. Grace, you hold the ship and coordinate extraction. If we are not back in 2 hours, leave without us, Grace shook her head. Not going to happen. It was not a request, Una said, but she smiled slightly as she said it. Old Gray checked his weapons one last time. Energy pistols, vibroblades, grenades designed to disable electronics rather than kill outright. He moved like he had never stopped hunting, like the retirement had been nothing more than a brief nap. For what it's worth, he said, I am glad you called me. It has been too long since I had a good fight. Una nodded. Then she looked at each member of her team. These people had risked everything to help her. They had left their lives behind to follow her into hell. She would not let their sacrifice be meaningless. Let's go, she said, and the hunt began. The drift was even worse than Una remembered. She had been here once before years ago, hunting a smuggler who had made the mistake of stealing from the wrong people. The station had been dangerous, then a lawless maze of dark corridors and desperate souls. But Marcus had transformed it into something worse, a fortress of fear and violence where his word was absolute law. They entered through a maintenance shaft on the station's lower levels. Tommy had provided the access codes, and they still worked. Marcus had been so focused on preparing for a frontal assault that he had neglected the back doors. The first lesson of any hunter: never underestimate your prey. The shaft opened into a service corridor lit by flickering red lights and filled with the hum of ancient machinery. Una led the way with Old Gray close behind. Ricky stayed in the middle, his weapons ready, his eyes scanning every shadow. They moved in silence, communicating through hand signals and glances, a perfect team. The first guards appeared 10 minutes, and 2 of them, human or close enough, standing outside a security checkpoint. Una took them down before they could raise an alarm. Her blades flashed twice, and they fell without a sound. Old Gray dragged the bodies into the shadows, and they continued on. Ricky's distraction began right on schedule. Explosions echoed through the station, distant but powerful. He had planted charges in the docking bay, rigged to create maximum chaos without actually destroying anything important. The idea was to draw Marcus' forces away from the command center, to give Una a clear path to her target. It worked better than expected. Corridors emptied as mercenaries rushed toward the explosions, shouting into communicators demanding information that no one had. Una and her team slipped through the chaos like ghosts. They climbed through access tunnels and crossed cargo bays filled with stolen goods. They passed cells where prisoners begged for help, and Una made silent promises to return for them if she survived. The command center was located at the heart of the station, a massive chamber that Marcus had converted into his throne room. It was protected by blast doors and automated turrets and at least 50 armed guards, according to Tommy's intelligence. But Tommy had also provided something else, a weakness. There was a ventilation shaft that ran directly above the command center. It was too small for most species, but Una was small too, and she had spent years learning to fit into spaces where no one expected. Harold Gray would create a diversion at the main entrance, draw the guards' attention, and keep them focused on the doors. Meanwhile, Una would drop in from above, get to Marcus, end this once and for all. It was a simple plan. Simple plans were always the best. They reached the access point for the ventilation shaft. Old Gray stopped and turned to face her. His ancient eyes were soft, now filled with something that might have been love. You have come so far, he said quietly. When I first found you, you were just a broken child full of rage and pain. I did not think you would survive the training. I did not think anyone could carry the weight you have carried, but you did. You became something extraordinary. Una felt her throat tighten. I had a good teacher. Old Gray shook his head. No, You had a tired old hunter who taught you how to kill. What you became after that was all you now go. Finish this. And when it is done, maybe you can finally rest as Yuna wanted to. Say something more. Something meaningful. But there was no time. There never was. She simply nodded once, and then she was climbing up into the darkness, leaving. Old Gray, behind the ventilation shaft, was cramped and hot, filled with the smell of recycled air and old metal. Yuna pulled herself forward inch by inch until she reached the grating that looked down into the command center. Marcus was there. He sat on a throne made of metal and bone, surrounded by screens that showed feeds from across the station. He was watching the chaos unfold, watching his men scramble to respond to Ricky's explosions, and he was smiling. Was older than Yuna remembered. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were lines on his face that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. He had been a monster when he served Vex Morrow, and he was a monster still. There were guards everywhere, at least 30 of them arranged around the chamber with weapons drawn. They were expecting her. Of course, they were. Marcus had known she would come. He had been counting on it. There in the center of the room were the hostages. 12 people bound and kneeling, humans and aliens from Earth's refugee communities. They had been taken during the attacks on the safe houses brought here as insurance. Marcus knew Yuna would not risk their lives. He knew she would hesitate. He was wrong. Yuna kicked out the grating and dropped into the room. The next 60 seconds were chaos. She hit the first guard before her feet touched the floor. Her blade took him across the throat, and she used his falling body to launch herself at the second. Her movements were a blur of violence, precise and economical, every strike designed to kill or disable. She was not fighting. She was performing a dance she had practiced 1,000 times. The dance of the silent reaper. The guards fired their weapons, but she was never where they aimed. She twisted and spun and dodged, moving through the hail of plasma bolts like they were raindrops. Old Gray had taught her that become the water, he had said. Flow around the stones. 15 guards fell in the first 30 seconds. Marcus shouted orders, pulling more men toward him, forming a wall of bodies between himself and Yuna. He grabbed one of the hostages, a young woman with terrified eyes, and put a blade to her throat. Stop, he commanded, or she'd die. Yuna stopped. She stood in the center of the carnage, surrounded by bodies and the groans of the wounded. Her breathing was steady. Her hands were steady. Everything was steady. Let them go, she said. Marcus laughed. Why would I do that? You killed Vex. You destroyed everything we built. You took my family, my future, my life. And you think you can just walk in here and demand mercy? I'm not asking for mercy, Yuna replied. I'm offering you a chance. Walk away. Let the hostages go. Disappear into the galaxy and never come back. That is the only mercy I have left to give. Marcus pressed the blade harder against the hostage's throat. A thin line of blood appeared on her skin. I could kill her right now. I could kill all of them, and there would be nothing you could do. Yuna met his eyes without flinching. Then do it. Marcus hesitated. Just for a tourist second. But a second was all she needed. She moved the blade, left her hand so fast it was invisible. It crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat and buried itself in Marcus' shoulder. His grip loosened, and the hostage dropped to the floor. Yuna was already there, catching the woman, pushing her toward the other hostages, shouting for them to run. Marcus screamed in rage and pain. He pulled the blade from his shoulder and charged. The fight that followed was different from all the others. Marcus was not just a crime lord. He was a killer himself, trained and augmented and driven by years of hate. He matched Yuna blow for blow, his cybernetic enhancements giving him speed and strength that would have overwhelmed anyone else. But Yuna was not anyone else. She was the Silent Reaper. They fought across the command center, smashing through screens and consoles, leaving destruction in their wake. Marcus was strong, but Yuna was faster. He was brutal, but she was precise. He fought to kill, but she had already accepted that she might die. The difference was that she had something to protect. She thought of Hana learning to fight in the empty gymnasium. She thought of Tommy hiding under her bed, terrified and alone. She thought of the hostages kneeling in chains. She thought of Earth and all the people who had no idea that someone was fighting for them in the darkness between the stars. And she refused to lose. The final blow came almost too fast to see Marcus overextended trying to land. A killing strike, and Yuna slipped inside his guard. Her blade found his heart and he froze. His eyes went wide with shock and disbelief. "You, Yuna," whispered close enough that only he could hear, "we're never going to win, Marcus." Fell the station, erupted into chaos as word spread that Marcus Cole was dead. Yuna freed the hostages and led them toward the docking bay where Grace was waiting. Old Gray appeared at her side, bloodied but alive with Ricky close behind. They fought their way through panicked mercenaries and crumbling defenses and reached the ship just as Coalition enforcement vessels finally arrived. The ride back to Earth was quiet. Tuna sat alone in the cargo hold, staring at her hands. They were covered in blood. Some of it hers. Most of it not. She had killed more people in the last hour than she could count. She had become the thing that monsters feared once again, but she had also saved 12 innocent lives. She had protected her planet. She had ended a threat that would have destroyed everything she cared about. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it would never be enough. She didn't know. When they landed, Hana was waiting. Tommy was there too, safe and whole and crying with relief. Old Gray disappeared back to his retirement, saying he would see her again someday. Ricky and Grace vanished into the stars with promises to return if she ever needed them. Mitchell met her at the landing site. His face was grim, but there was respect in his eyes. "The Coalition has taken control of the drift," he said. "Marcus' organization is finished. The refugee communities are safe." Yuna nodded. She was too tired for words. Next morning, she walked into her astrophysics class and sat in her usual seat in the back row. Professor Mitchell gave his lecture and she took notes like nothing had changed, like she was still just the quiet girl that nobody noticed. Asterisk.